they're legally entitled to. So I've been with NELT for 10 years, but before that, I was with the Connecticut Department of Labor and for 35 years and spent most of my time working on unemployment insurance issues. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about unemployment insurance eligibility and how you can access benefits.
Right. And for those who are just joining us, I'm Jeremy Wolf. I'm the executive director of More Than Baseball. Simon Rosenblum Larson, who's our president, should be joining us in just a bit. And he's obviously very knowledgeable in stuff like this, and will give a really good perspective of being a baseball player during all of this, and what to say in your forms, and how to look at it as a ball player. So George, I'll let you take it away with what you have prepared, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Sure. Basically, unemployment insurance is probably something you have not had to deal with much in the past, but it is a program that is available in every state. It's created by federal law, but every state has to have an unemployment insurance program. Typically, ball players aren't eligible if they have a contract. There's even a special provision in federal unemployment law that says that you can't use your baseball wages to qualify during the off season under normal conditions. But a couple of things are different now. One is that for the first time, ball players are going to be unemployed during the regular season. So most state unemployment insurance laws should recognize that you are like any other unemployed worker, and you should be able to apply for benefits. The other thing that's different is that there is a special federal program called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance that was enacted just since the pandemic started, really in March. And this program basically says if for some reason you're not eligible under your state unemployment law, they should be referring you over and automatically taking an application for this other program called PUA, which is basically the same level of benefits and should entitle you to federal unemployment insurance. And attached to either of these, whether you end up qualifying for state or federal unemployment benefits, we have an unusual add-on that Congress has put in place through the end of July, which basically says whatever you qualify for in unemployment, add $600 per week. So that is another, you don't need all these acronyms, but that is called PUC. And that is something that's getting the attention of a lot of people who might not otherwise have filed for unemployment. So every state's got a different system. There's some tricks. There's a lot of it, most of it's done online these days. The states are pretty overwhelmed. Over 40 million people have filed for unemployment benefits in the last 10 weeks. So there's a lot of horror stories out there about long waits on the telephone or to get through online. And then you folks probably also have the additional issue of some of you have got wages in more than one state. So we'll talk about that too, and how to combine your wages from more than one state into a single unemployment claim. So that's what I got for an intro, and we can start, Jeremy, with either your questions or individual worker questions.
Sure. If you can go into that, these players are either their complexes are either in Florida, in Arizona. Their teams might be their paychecks. the organization might be based in Arizona, Florida, or their state where they play. What should that process, what should they take into account if they were in AA this year and they played in Iowa, North Carolina, South Carolina? They don't know what state to file in, if they file in all and just choose the best option. I think that's pretty unclear for some guys right now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the first thing that's going to matter is where you had wages in something called a base period. So right now, and I'm going to assume everybody's filing right around now in the month of June. The period is for, in pretty much every state, the first 4 of the last 5 completed calendar quarters. So if you're filing in June, you skip over the first quarter of 2020, and the period that we're going to care about, the base period, is going to be calendar year 2019, the 4 quarters in 2019. Where did you work in those 4 quarters? What states? And if you don't have enough wages to qualify and under each state's law, most states will also let you look at will bump it up and let you consider the first quarter of 2020. But in general, what we're going to care about is what were your wages in 2019? So if you worked in one state in 2019, then you should file your unemployment claim against that state. So that generally means just hitting Google and, if it's, North Carolina, go to North Carolina unemployment insurance, and it'll give you basically instructions on how to connect to file your application online. If you worked in more than one state in 2019, you basically have the option of filing in either of those states, or maybe that you had 3 states. It can be in any one of them, but you need to have worked in the state that you're filing against. So that's kind of the rule of thumb. If you have individual questions today about between states, I'm glad to answer them. Some states have a track record of being very difficult to file against. Unfortunately, one of those states is Florida. Florida has been all over the news for just having the most people who are having the hardest time getting their benefits. Their computer system really kind of has been very ineffective, and people have been forced to go get paper applications. And the majority of people who file for benefits in Florida still haven't gotten them, even though we're talking now 9-10 weeks for some of these claimants. So, as I say, I'm glad to talk to you about specific choices if you have them. But the main thing is you need to have worked in whatever state you file against. You need to have worked there in 2019, and then they will take responsibility for getting the wages from the other states considered in your application.
Melissa asked a phenomenal question. She asked, are international players eligible, those who are here on a P1 visa, if the team is paying? So that's the first question. Are international players eligible for this as employees based in the United States who are here on a P1 visa?
They are, well, first of all, they would need to have wages in 2019 in the US. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that they need to be legally documented. So, some kind of green card that, or immigration status that says they are legally permitted to work now in the US. So they'll typically be asked for that if not asked directly for the documentation, they'll be asked for enough information so that they can confirm with something called the alien verification system that you are legally documented.
Her second question in this is pertinent for Americans and Latin guys. If the team is paying $400 a week as a stipend, now the $400 a week, from our understanding, is a stipend and not necessarily a wage. How should the player report that on his unemployment form? Is it listed as severance pay? And what's the best way to describe that?
Yeah, I mean, could I ask, is this something that you expect that you're going to keep getting in the month ahead?
It was for the month March, end of March, I think it was said that players were going to get it for April and May until May 31st. Every team has said that they will continue to pay this $400 per week, except for Oakland. Oakland has said that they won't continue to pay the players. And we don't know how long continuing this pay will last. We don't know if it's another month or two. I know it certainly won't be past the end of the season, which is September. That's just a good wild guess. Yeah.
We had this question the first roundup of the first seminar we did here, and unfortunately the answer is it's a state-by-state decision. I think in general, though, what is the kinds of income that are going to be disqualifying are basically wages or anything that's a remuneration for service. So this stipend, as I understand it, is generally for housing and isn't necessarily compensation for any kind of services. I know we went to, Simon and I had this out with the California agency, and they're under California law. I know we concluded that it was not disqualifying, that it just doesn't meet their definition of the kinds of payments that would be deducted. However, I would say you should report it when you apply and make it clear that it's not wages, that it's not severance pay, that it is a stipend that is not for any kind of services. And then that it'll be up to that state's law to decide whether they're going to deduct it or not.
We got a good note here. It says for the $400 a week stipend, she read that it wasn't considered wages, but we should report it. Not all UI sites allow you to explain that it is a stipend and not wages. So when we file for a weekly claim, UI benefits, it asks, do you earn any wages this week? Do we have to report it every week as wages?
I think you need to report that you've got a stipend initially, and what the state should do, if they think it's an issue, they'll have some kind of not a hearing, but they'll look into it further to decide your original eligibility, and then after that, if it's not disqualifying, then you shouldn't have to report it after that. But unfortunately, I can't speak to how every state's going to treat it. I think that most state laws should consider it to be non-disqualifying, but you're going to, the only advice I can give you is to be honest and to explain that there is this stipend, but that it is not wages.
In 2019, and every year, minor league baseball players aren't paid for spring training. They're only paid for the games they play in during the season, which may or may not be in the state that they have spring training in. So in an instance where they're filing for unemployment, if they didn't make a wage where they played spring training, but that was my question is, should they file for unemployment only in states where they were paid or states where they performed at their job?
They should only file in places where they earned wages.
Okay.
Yeah.
We got a good question here too. It says, we played in Japan in 2019, but paid taxes in the United States. So if wages coming from another country, and we had this question too, because some players asked that their wages came from Canada. But in this instance, it's Japan. How do they apply for unemployment?
So who was paying the wages?
The Japanese baseball team said he played all of 2019 in Japan. We had no U.S. income to report. They can't verify income in the United States, only through Japan.
Yeah. Unless you had some wages somewhere paid, by a U.S. employer, you're probably not going to be eligible for any kind of unemployment insurance. I'm just, there is this new federal program, which I don't think it's been tested on that question. I mean, if you wanted to, you can, the one piece of advice I would give to anybody is you can always file and, try. And the situation you just described with Japanese earnings, you're definitely not going to be eligible for state unemployment insurance, but they would then say, you can try and file against under this federal program, PUA. I think they're still going to need some kind of U.S. wages, but if you're willing to take the time, you can try under that program.
Yeah, she asked a good question here too, a good follow-up. What about if we paid taxes here, even though we were paid by a Japanese company? Does it matter if their income came in Japanese yen or in U.S. dollars if they file taxes in the United States?
Well, if it's taxable U.S. income, you've got me wondering whether it's reported someplace. I mean, that the Japanese team doesn't. There's no connection to any U.S. employer.
Lisa, if you're willing to unmute and kind of describe your situation so that George can kind of talk you through it, I think that would be cool. Just a good follow-up too. What about if we were paid taxes here, even though we were paid by a Japanese company? They paid federal and state taxes. God, that's unbelievably complicated and fascinating at the same time.
Yeah. Like I said, you could probably take the, so you've got some documentation of earnings that you pay taxes on. And there's some kind, I see the reference here to a tax treaty. You might have a shot under the PUA program. I have not seen this, but that doesn't mean it. The PUA program is very broad, and it seems to be geared toward trying to help anybody who lost a job and who has some recent work history. So it could be that they'll take into account special arrangement with Japan. I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello. Hi, sorry, I had to do my microphone. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, we played in Japan, the last couple of years, but paid federal taxes and state taxes here in the U.S. And then this year we're with the Diamondbacks and then got released a couple of days ago. But I just find it hard to believe that we can't be, and I know there's a couple other players in our position as well. I just find it so hard to believe that we can't apply for this because we've paid taxes here and, even over the years, paid thousands of dollars in taxes,
And this is because there's some kind of treaty between Japan and the U.S. That the wages earned there are taxed here?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sorry for not being more familiar with this, but I mean, I'm pretty positive you would not qualify under regular state unemployment, but the only thing that this second program, PUA, um, cares about is, have you sort of involuntarily lost the job because because of the events related to the pandemic, and you have that. And then the other thing they care about is that there's some recent wage history. Um, so, and you're saying there's not a dollar of U.S. wages anywhere?
Not in 2019, no. Just like, from spring training, and which obviously isn't much. And then that stipend that we got for the last couple months, that $400 a week, and then that's it.
Is
Yeah.
your, if I may, real quickly, I'm sorry, real quickly, was he paid in spring training to do big league games?
I think I think there was a few times when he was, every game he was pitched in or was attended were big league games. So yeah, he did get paid the extra for those games.
Yeah, then that would be, I'm assuming wage. I'm assuming that would be a wage because big leaguers are paid during spring training. I don't think that would be a stipend like the $400 a week. So in that instance, we got a comment that said that's meal money in spring training. It's so complicated paying big leaguers and minor leaguers.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I know that we talked about calendar year 19, but basically the way this works is you file for state unemployment benefits. You don't have any U.S. wages in 2019, so you're not eligible. They then move you over to this other program, PUA, which even that little bit of wages in 2020 is going to be enough for them to say, you've lost a job and you should have some earnings. And the thing about PUA is, even if it isn't enough to qualify you for a regular benefit rate, they have a minimum that you have to get under PUA. And it's basically whatever half of the average unemployment benefit is in your state. So if you're in Arizona and the average unemployment benefit is $260, let's say, however little you have, you'll qualify for half of that, which would be maybe 130 or something less than that. But the reason that's important is every time you have a payment, a PUA payment of any amount, even if it's just $100, through the end of July, this other program attaches 600 to it. So
Okay.
100 gets 700.
I'm sorry, I have one question. I tried to apply for the unemployment, which I couldn't do because then they wanted the employer before the Diamondbacks, and because it was international, there was no room for me to enter an international address, so I got nowhere with that. And then I tried the PUA, and it said, sorry, but based on the information you provided us, you should be applying for unemployment, not this. I had it came up with that screen, so I was like, oh my goodness, now it's not even letting me apply for the PUA. I was completely torn. I was like, what do we do then? I feel so stuck and frustrated because it won't even let me do that, the PUA.
Yeah, I mean, and this is Arizona?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were one of the last states to get their PUA program up and running. But you should have, basically what the state requires is they need to have some record that you're not eligible for state unemployment. So you should go through the process of being denied state unemployment benefits, and they then should be automatically pushing you onto PUA. So you should go through the process of getting denied state benefits in Arizona, and if they don't put you on right away, then you should contact the state and say that you want your PUA application processed. And I know that they had when they finally got PUA up and running there, they had like more than 100,000 people who are waiting in the queue. So they put them all
Yeah.
on the way. So you should be part of that.
Okay, yeah. So I guess I should just call them, because I know that a couple other players have applied for this, and one of them, who's actually on this call right now, got a letter, actually was able to apply. For some reason I wasn't, but she got a letter saying that they were accepted or something. So yeah, I think I just have to call them maybe, but they just said that's really hard to get through, and some days you can't even get.
Unfortunately, yeah, programs are all overwhelmed, but yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have a circumstance that to the average unemployment staff person is very unusual. And
Yes, they told me to go and apply in Japan. To actually, when I first called, I was like, the lady had no idea. I was on hold for like an hour and a half with her, and she kept coming back. And then she's like, okay, you need to go and apply in Japan. I was like, there is no way they're going to let me get unemployment in Japan. So, yeah.
all right,
All right. Thank you.
good luck.
Thanks.
It's so complicated. It's so confusing to describe minor league baseball players, major league baseball players too, in that instance, in this environment. I feel for anybody who's been denied, even though it is true these guys are. We don't even know if they're technically unemployed. The contract was pulled. If you can explain that real briefly, what that means legally, that their uniform player contract was pulled so that they could file for the PUA. Are they still under contract? Will they get this year of service time? Do you understand that in a better way than I'm trying to explain?
Well, the only thing I can say is that, the fact that you're under contract doesn't have a whole lot of significance for unemployment insurance. Basically, what we care about is, did you provide any services during the week, and did you get paid for them? And if the answer is no to both of those questions, then you're unemployed and should be qualifying for unemployment insurance.
We had a question in, it says, if you were denied for some reason, are you allowed to refile again at some point? Is there an appeal process? Would you try for another state if you're eligible in another state? What does that process look like?
Sure. There are appeal processes for any denial, depending on what state you're in. You need to file an appeal anywhere within 7 to 21 days. If the question is, should I have applied in a different state, you can, if you're ineligible in one state, you can try and apply in the other state, but you need to make sure in the initial application process that you list or provide the names of all the states and employers that you work for. Because that's a signal to the state that they have to create what's called a combined wage claim. So if you can use that terminology when you're applying, say, look, I worked in 2 or 3 states last year, so I need to file a combined wage claim. That they then have to request your wages from the other states. But yeah, there is an appeal process. Usually, especially now with so many people filing, there's going to be long waits to get a hearing. But there is an appeal process, and it's a pretty simple one. Just give your reasons why you think you should not have been denied, and usually just submit it online, and then eventually you'll get notice that a hearing is going to be held on a certain day and time.
I got a question last week, and I don't know if John's on here, but he had mentioned that there was a bit of information in his form that he filled out in New York where he might have filled out the information incorrectly. Something came out where he was given more money than he thought he had deserved. If there's an instance where a player deems or anybody deems that they weren't given the right amount of money, if they were given too much, if they got it fraudulently or accidentally? What's the process like that? Just real briefly, if there's seems to be a mistake in what they're receiving.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing too formal other than you should make contact with the unemployment agency and do what you can to um, either speak directly to a staff person about it or send an email explaining your situation that's got your social security number. I mean, what that does is to protect you. It may be that the amount was right. It may be that it's agency error, but if you've ever got a doubt about a payment and you've got some documentation that you brought it to the agency's attention, that means even if a year from now they discover that you were overpaid and come back after the money, they won't, that undoes any argument that you were committing fraud, which is a term these states throw around a lot. When really probably most overpayments are mistakes, not anybody intentionally cheating. And you want to make sure that you bring it to their attention so that that they can't call it fraud later, because fraud has a lot of additional penalties besides having to pay it back. It can be more, they can charge you additional interest and, sometimes 50% or 100% more than what you were actually overpaid. So.
We got a good question here. If a player receives a one-off check for an endorsement, signing a Topps card deal, which is when I signed mine, it was about, I think it was like $2. And the income has been received this past month. Does that have to be reported on the unemployment forms? If so, what's the best way to report that income, one-off income?
Two things going on here. Once you're filing for benefits, anytime you have income in a given week, you need to report that, because the odds are, if it's some kind of income for employment, it's going to be deducted from your unemployment benefit. If you've got something else that's not wages and it was earned before you applied for benefits, then generally you don't need to you don't need to report it, because the state's going to have what your earnings reported to them by your employer as wages, and anything else, as long as it's not during a week that you're filing for, it's generally not, unless they ask you specifically, there's not a need to provide them additional information.
Does anybody have questions? Want to unmute and jump on? You can wave your hand. I'll unmute you as well. George, from these two conversations, is there something that we're missing? Is there something that these players should know as they're doing this process, as they're uncertain about their future? Is there something that, in your expert opinion, that they should be weary of, they should be in the know of?
Yeah, just basically that states have generally made it hard. On the one hand, it's, 40 years ago, you used to have to stand in an unemployment line, and now you can do it online. On the other hand, a lot of these online systems are very clunky to begin with. They can be confusing, and at the present time, they're overwhelmed by, we've never had anywhere near this many unemployed people in this country ever. Going back to the 30s and the Great Depression. So, there are just lots and lots of stories of people, trying to get a hold of somebody on a phone for days and weeks at a time. And I would just say, be patient, try to, uh, sometimes you're going to be asked to, you're going to file an application online and then you're still going to have to talk to somebody by telephone, and that can be frustrating. But in general, it's worth following through because you have a higher possibility of getting benefits than probably ever before as well. Just because even if you don't make it under the regular state program, this PUA program is offers a much wider range of eligibility.
Are there any players who have a perspective that might help other players here as well? I think it'd be cool to kind of hear that perspective as well. In the meantime, I just got a note too. Let's see. What should players put on the last date of work? Should they put the last time they were paid, or should they put they were in spring training but they were unpaid? Is that considered work in the eyes of government and law?
Right. It is are players just getting some kind of notice now that is triggering, a new wave of applications, or is it just that time is dragged on and players are thinking it's time to file?
Okay. We got a good question here. What do we put on the application where it says how much they make an hour if they don't technically work by the hour?
Yeah, generally they're not going to ask that question. They're going to, for regular unemployment, your employer each quarter is reporting to the state your wages. So when you file, if you're filing in Arizona, somebody at the Arizona Unemployment Agency should be pulling up your record on the computer, and it's going to show 4 quarters. And if you had wages in Arizona in any of those quarters, those wages are already going to be there. So the only time anybody's going to be looking at anything that isn't already on the computer will be if you're not eligible for state unemployment and you move over to this PUA program. Then they may ask you different questions, including there they can include things like self-employment income and other things that don't normally get counted. If you were an Uber driver, those kinds of things. But in general, they're not going to ask you about your hourly wage.
We got a question here. If they got released just recently, what would be their last day they got paid? Would it be last season when they were paid via salary, or would it be technically this stipend, this $400 a week stipend?
I would say it's the wages, when they last got wages, because you're basically contending that stipend is not wages, right?
Okay. Quick question right here. What do we put for the physical address of work site? I'm assuming it's the stadium that you played at in the state in which you were paid these wages. I'm guessing that would be.
Yeah,
that would be it.
Right.
Okay. I think that's all I have. Unless anybody has questions, wants to add in the chat or unmute. This is a good question here. The stipend, $400 a week, is being subject to federal and Social Security income taxes. Is that what that SSI is? Says, but the stipend is being subject to federal and SSI taxes. Does that mean the clarification of what this money isn't clear from either end? If it's a stipend, is it going to be taxed? And if it's taxed, does that mean it's a wage?
Right. I mean, I think, we've got two things we're considering here. One is it wages that gets used to calculate your benefit? And I think the answer to that is no. And then the question is it, if for some reason you're still getting it after you apply for unemployment, is it something that gets deducted and potentially, because it's more than your unemployment rate, it knocks you out for eligibility? And we've been trying to take the view that because it's not really, it's something different than remuneration for services. It's not really, you're not doing anything, it's not payment for your services, that it's not, that it shouldn't be disqualifying. But that, as I said at the beginning, that's up to each state law. And it looks like in California, they do not treat it as disqualifying, but there's still the possibility they may in other states.
At least asked a good question here. So for clarification, for date of last paid, how do we work out the date of last paid wages? Is it prior? I guess it depends on the state in that instance. Is it prior to that $400 or is it that
Yeah, I would say
$400?
prior to the 400, yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So in this instance, players who are still affiliated in baseball, we touched on this briefly earlier. Players who are still affiliated in baseball are able to file. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I guess we did answer that they're eligible under the PUA. Has there been an instance that you've heard, or if anybody here has heard that players have filed for unemployment and have received unemployment? That means in some cases it is PUA and it is unemployment. But it's an interesting thought, and again, just adds to the complexities of what we're dealing with.
Simon may know that because he had referred the California player to me, and
That's right.
And I believe that was still a question of whether that player was going to get regular state unemployment benefits from California. The other thing that's going on, I just want to mention, is that if any of you last year did anything other than baseball for employment, those wages are usable also to help calculate your eligibility for benefits. So, and I don't know whether that's the case for anybody, but that even a small amount of wages doing something else might get you a small unemployment eligibility. And as I say, during this time, there is this PUC program where you add $600 to each payment.
Mm-hmm. I think that's it from me on my end. I played 2 years ago. I was released. I lived in Israel before this started, and I did not lose a job. I'm not filing for unemployment, so I don't have a perspective on that. If anybody has any last questions, we had one last question here. If you're approved, what is the time frame for receiving unemployment payments? He asked if it depends on the state. I don't know the process of what that looks like, how long it lasts. Does it last until you get a job, and what the time frame is?
So in general, most states provide 26 weeks of benefits, but there are extensions in place right now. Unfortunately, one of the states that provides less than 26 is Florida, which only provides like 12. However, they're depending on which program you're under, basically there are extensions in place that would that pretty much guarantee 39 weeks, and for just about anybody who's eligible for some form of unemployment, whether it's state or PUA, now could be eligible through the end of the year, maybe in some instances beyond that.
Well, I think that just about does it. Unless someone has a final question, I want to thank you for your time and everybody who was on this. I think, oh boy, that's a big message. Let me read it real quick. She says, just an FYI for anyone interested, we applied in Arizona. We were not in Arizona because we didn't earn wages in the state. They referred us to the okay. It's an interesting note. It's an interesting note. Yeah, I would take note of that too. Just there are options if players are turned down in one state versus another. I think over the next few weeks we should do another one because I think guys are going to have follow-up questions based on what they've been receiving. The information they get over the next couple of weeks, and if there are any, if there is struggle actually getting these payments in. And so one last question, still playing, getting $400 a week, does applying for unemployment go against my contract, or should not be worried and just apply? I'd say just apply, unless it can conflict with anything, but I don't see how it would.
Yeah, I can't advise you on what your contract says, sorry. But I think in general, the unemployment law doesn't care if you have a contract if you're not being paid.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's do this again in a few weeks. George, thank you so much for your time, everybody who hopped on. Let me send this last message. If anybody has any questions, email me, jeremy@morethanbaseball.org, or my partner, Simon at morethanbaseball.org. And then this will be on our website later on today if anybody has any questions, and then we'll send some follow-up emails and stuff with further information for everybody. Cool. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, George, again for your time.
Thank you.
Really do appreciate it.
Good luck, everyone.